I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why religions are called faiths, collectively. Because you believe something in the absence of evidence. That's what it is. That's why it's called faith. Otherwise, we would call all religions evidence. But we don't, for exactly that reason.
I'm not exactly sure that's correct. Before I explain why, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Jim McCarthy. I'm a Bible teacher and a Christian apologist who's written on several topics related to the defense of the Christian faith. And I've started this channel because I would like to speak to a wider audience about some of the most important things to me in the scriptures. And as I just listen to all the things that are being said about what Christianity teaches and what the Bible teaches, and often put in a very bad light, I just feel a need to respond to some of these things. Now, I'd like to address what Neil deGrasse said in that clip, and why I disagree that faith is believing, quote, in the absence of evidence, unquote. Now, in his defense, there are some religious people who think of faith that way. And I'm not saying they're absolutely wrong. There is an intuitive sense of God that is not necessarily based on scientific evidence and philosophical arguments. And a lot of very dear people have experienced God and are sure that God exists. And I don't want to speak poorly of that at all. But in the public arena, particularly biblical Christianity is not a faith in the absence of evidence. It's the opposite. It is faith built upon not just scientific evidence, which is very important to an astrophysicist like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but also philosophical and rational arguments for the existence of God. And I question what he says here. There's a faith in the absence of evidence. He holds that there is no evidence. And he cites in part, just in part, the problem of evil. In the last episode, I spoke about how Neil deGrasse Tyson was a witness to the attacks on the World Trade Center. He lives in Manhattan. He saw the towers burn. He saw people jump from the 80th floor. And again, I don't want to speak poorly of somebody who's experienced something so horrific. I mean, that has to have an effect upon you. And when you don't have an answer to that, the why, if God exists and God is all-powerful, why would he allow such evil to take place? I understand that. He lives not far from the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Lower Manhattan. I encourage you someday to go and visit that. It's very moving. When we look at World War II and what happened in the death camps, not just to 6 million Jews, but also to Roma people, to homosexuals, to the handicapped, to Soviet soldiers, hundreds of thousands of additional people were put to death at those camps. And we say, where was God at Auschwitz? Where was God? Why didn't he stop it? These are valid questions. J.L. Mackie is one of those who's presented a formal argument against the existence of God based on the problem of evil. He was an Oxford professor, an Australian-born philosopher. He lived from 1917 to 1981, and he held that it is positively irrational to believe in a God who would allow the innocent to suffer, who is all-powerful and supposedly all good, and yet permits evil. This is what Mackie wrote. God is omnipotent. God is wholly good, and yet evil exists. There seems to be some contradiction between these three propositions, so that if two of them were true, the third would be false. But at the same time, all three are essential parts of most theological positions. The theologian, it seems, at once must adhere and cannot consistently adhere to all three. In other words, the Christian position based upon the Bible is, in his words, positively irrational. Now, again, I want to emphasize something I spoke about in the previous episode. They leave out the word immediately, because this is what all the philosophers I've seen who take on this topic are implying but not stating. If God is good and God is all power, he would immediately eliminate evil. And since he doesn't on their time schedule, it's questionable whether God even exists. And it's positively irrational to say that a good and all-powerful God would allow evil to exist, even for a moment. Is there not possibly a purpose in why God is allowing evil in our day? Now, I don't want to make this a trivial thing. This is a major thing. It is a hard thing to understand why the innocent suffer. You go into a cancer ward, you see children suffering with cancer. You see young people dying. It moves the heart. You question, and I question, why does God allow this? And as a person who's served as a Bible teacher and pastor, I've seen suffering. I've seen people at their worst, and only could look to God and cry out for help. But still, even I ask why. And as I've studied this in the scriptures, I've come to some conclusions, and I've seen some things. I've been teaching the Bible for 40 years, but it's only maybe in the last 8 years or so the pieces have started coming together. And it involves, again, God's overarching purpose in all that he's doing. And in that context, to me, the problem of evil began to make sense. And I'd like to explain that to you. What is biblical faith? And it's not just based on the etymology of the Greek word for faith, which is pistis, and its related verb, piithō, but it's how the word is used and the context of the New Testament. We see faith in action. To believe, to have faith, pistis, the word is derived from a verb peithō, which means to be persuaded. And this is the concept of biblical faith. Biblical faith is a persuasion based upon a hearing, based upon evidences. You experience life. You see God. You see the evidence, both scientific and also philosophical, for the existence of God. And you see the case laid out for God, and you come to the persuasion God exists. It's not a baseless faith. It is a faith based upon a hearing, much like would take place in a court of law. The jury hears the evidence. And if they're persuaded the person's guilty, they vote, and they inform the judge they find this man guilty. It's the same in coming to faith in the existence of God. It's an accumulative case. It's looking at all of the evidence for God. One piece may not convince you, but when you put the whole thing together, you come to the conclusion the best explanation of the evidence is that God exists. God, as described in the Bible, as revealed by himself to us through the scriptures, through his prophets, is alive and speaking to us. That's the conclusion I've reached. You see this in the New Testament. What did Jesus do after his resurrection? He presented himself to his disciples through many convincing proofs over a period of 40 days. Why? Because he wanted their faith based on evidence. During those 40 days, more than 500 people, Paul tells us, saw the risen Christ. People spoke with him, talked with him, people who knew him, spent time with him. They had meals with him. When the first disciples saw him alive, they thought he was a spirit. He says, I'm not a spirit. A spirit doesn't have flesh and blood. Touch me. When Thomas, doubting Thomas we call him, wouldn't listen to the other disciples, when the other apostles said, he's alive, we've seen him. He said, I won't believe until I put my fingers in the holes where the nails were, till I put my hand into his side where the spear went. And when Jesus appeared again to his disciples, Thomas was there. And Jesus held forth his hands. He says, Thomas, Put your fingers where the nails were. Put your hand where the spear went. And all Thomas could say was, my Lord and my God. Now, this is biblical faith. And I'd like to present to you some of the evidence for the existence of God, some of the arguments, the philosophical arguments for God. But it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of episodes. And just follow through in the New Testament. What do we see happening in the New Testament? Take example of the Apostle Paul. What did he do? Every time he'd go into a new city, he'd go to the synagogue, and he'd talk to the religious leaders, and he would reason with them, and he would persuade them, not for 10 minutes, not for an hour, sometimes for days, returning every day to speak to these theologians and religious leaders, persuading them that Jesus is the Messiah, and persuading them that he is the Son of God. He was so persuasive that when he was brought in his trial before King Agrippa II, the Roman appointed king of Galilee, Agrippa himself said, in short time, Paul, you will persuade even me to become a Christian. He found Paul's arguments so convincing. And so I hope you'll join us in this channel as we go through these things and we consider the problem of evil, which is a negative argument against the existence of God, which I think can be answered. And we look at the positive evidence in favor of the existence of God. Here I'm talking about scientific evidence and philosophical, rational arguments for the existence of God. I hope you'll return. If you want to follow along, this is going to be a long trip, but I'd like to gather together a community of like-minded people who are interested in these topics. You don't have to be a Christian. If you're an atheist, an agnostic, join with us, add your comments, help us to think it through. And it's going to take a while, but if you come back again and follow the whole argument, I think you'll find it extremely interesting. I find it extremely interesting. I think you will as well.